Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and for the great panel. My name's Sue Dunn from Pitcher Partners. One of the themes that's come up a bit this morning is that of residential property, and I'm wondering whether from a constructor's perspective or a homelessness service provider's perspective or a banker's perspective or even from an outsider's perspective, anyone wishes to comment on what they see as the current public policy rationale for negative gearing on existing residential property.
All right. All righty. You're not probably going to like what I'm going to say. Negative gearing per se is the same as what we do for every investment that we make. In other words, if you invest in something and that you get a cost of that investment, you can claim it off your tax. So every other product anywhere in the Australian economy has the same treatment. The issue to me on negative gearing is that you've got the 50% discount. So it might be unusual, but the debate that nobody has, the real problem with negative gearing is the top marginal tax rate at 50%. Because if you put it back down to something like 30-something, negative gearing would go away because no one would worry about trying to get their 25% rather than their 50%. I have an issue about, is this fair, et cetera, But the other thing I think you need to be very careful about is we're talking about the wealth effects of house prices, and people say we want affordable housing. For most of us in the economy, affordable housing means your house price goes down. So you might be able, if that's the case, so let's say there's a 10% fall in house prices, that's probably, in rough terms, going to take 1% off consumption, which is going to take about 0.75% off GDP. So the big risk that you run is you get affordable housing, but everyone's unemployed. And so I think you need to think a little bit more carefully about this. When I worked in Treasury, everybody used to say it's ridiculous to have the top marginal tax rate much different from the corporate tax rate. And somehow they've managed to get one at 49 or something and the other at 28. And that just, it's great for lawyers, it's great for planners, et cetera, but it's just really bad. And so I just sort of think the topic that no one's talking about is the top marginal tax rate. So I think we're number 8 in the world. I think we're number 3 or 4 in the OECD. But no one's going to talk about that. But I'll pick up another comment. I really agree with the idea that what we should be doing is infrastructure. 10 years money for the government at 2.8%. Give me a break. That's a real rate of nothing. So, and then we get into this debate about, we have to have austerity. Well, Australian debt is 17%. The Germans are 80. Most people get worried at, the Greeks are 160. We're 7. Oh, if you're worried about that, Japan's 220, by the way. We're 17. We can afford it, but unfortunately the politicians have talked us into the idea that a surplus is good and a deficit is bad. Well, you're playing with the price of debt when nobody wants debt and you're sitting there causing problems. So, I'll also be controversial. One other thing you could do is people want bolt holes from offshore. You could increase the tax a lot, okay? Then you take that money and you put it in infrastructure so people who can then live out in the burbs and actually get into town. But I don't know whether anyone's going to do that. So I sort of get depressed. But I think, negative gearing to me isn't a problem, other than what's the real problem is the top marginal tax rate and the incentives that takes. But I think the statistics are something like the top 1% provide 20% of the tax take, top 10% take more than 50%. So that's a big restructure of the government, but they've let it go. So.
Sure. Oh, sorry.
It would be remiss of me not to make a comment about negative gearing.
Yeah.
You'd all be familiar with many welfare professionals and and people in my sector, decry negative gearing as the great evil. But I'm reminded recently our Prime Minister said coal is good for humanity, which left many people gobsmacked. So I'm going to do something similar from someone from my sector. Negative gearing is absolutely essential. The problem with negative gearing is that it's poorly targeted. If you touch negative gearing, you will collapse. You'll collapse people's retirement incomes and dreams. So that government who did that will be, well, not just out of power, they'll just disappear off the face of the planet, never to be seen again. You can't really tinker with this stuff. You can't play with this stuff, but you can tinker with it. You could retarget negative gearing. You could grandfather existing. Not touch that. Don't muck around with people's retirement incomes and dreams. Grandfather it. Target it for new construction. Target it for construction at a certain size or percentage of average household size. You'd put me out of a job in about 6 to 8 years. I wouldn't mind so much. I think people should speak to their strengths. The welfare lobby, love them to bits, probably not the best people to be advising on taxation and only where it should be spent.